Hello. Yesterday I got to 1764 on the history of the Russian Germans. So just the first establishment of settlement along the Volga, following the 22nd July 1763, a manifesto by Empress Catherine II, Tsarina of Russia, better known as Catherine the Great. But the Volga Germans are only one of two major ethnic German settlements in the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. And there are also a number of smaller settlements, many of them daughter colonies shooting off from these original two settlement concentration. Now, the first one, of course, the Volga region, which we just talked about, Catherine II wanting to bring in German farmers as a buffer against the Kazakhs, and I went on about the mistake of the Russian government in referring to the Kazakhs as Kyrgyz, when the Kyrgyz are referred to as Black Kyrgyz, but also provide an example for surrounding Russian peasantry. The better farming techniques doesn't really work real well, but it does establish a very prosperous and agriculturally successful set of German colonies in the Volga that are able to produce a significantly large amounts of grain, particularly wheat, also some other agricultural goods. Tobacco is a major crop among the Volga Germans. Some major industries develop, particularly milling, the creation of flour out of wheat. Also, some textile industry developed there as well. But the other large group of ethnic Germans to settle in the Russian Empire came into mostly what is now Ukraine, also further south into Crimea, which has recently been, again, politically detached from Ukraine. This is the so-called Black Sea region, Schwarzmeerdeutsche, mostly. And basically, there's two distinct groups here in far as immigration, starting really in the late 18th again and early 19th century. One group starting in 1789, Mennonites, who are a distinct religious group and maybe in some ways distinctly different ethnically from the other Germans, and that many of them are biologically descendant of Germanized Dutch people. And this becomes an issue in World War One and during the early 1920s in the Soviet Union. The idea that they are citizens of Dutch heritage, but they speak German. But I mean, the dialect of German they speak is fairly close to Dutch. It's not Hochdeutsch. It's Plattdeutsch. So the Mennonites, though, because of their opposition to service in the military, opposition to taking oaths, basically trying to stay outside of modern states, not sending their children to schools that run by the state, but in particular their opposition to military service gets them in trouble with many states. And in this case, they get in trouble with the state of Prussia, and they end up leaving West Prussia and settling in Ukraine. And their leaders are able to get them a charter of privilege in 1801 from the son of Empress Catherine II, Tsar Paul I. And this wave of immigrants, by 1810, about 18,000 Mennonites settled in Ukraine in their own villages, obviously separate from the Ukrainian population, but also separate from later waves of ethnic Germans that will come, much larger numbers who are Lutheran, as well as a significant minority of Catholics. So, what happens geopolitically is that most of southern Ukraine, the coastline, and all of Crimean Peninsula are part of the Crimean Khanate, which is allied with the Ottoman Empire. And there is a war between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire that leads to the defeat of the Ottomans. And the treaty in 1774 detaches the Crimean Khanate as a military ally of the Ottomans, the kind of junior partner, and makes it a political vassal state of the Russian Empire. But this is only a temporary solution. And in 1783, Catherine II outright annexes all of the territory of the Crimean Khanate, and it is incorporated into the Russian Empire. And this means that politically, the Crimean Khanate, which is ruled by the Crimean Tatars, ceases to exist as an independent state at this time. And this opens up the territory that had been the Crimean Khanate to foreign settlement by Europeans, Russians, Ukrainians. But the Russian government also finds that, as in the case of the Volga, this is insufficient, that they need to go and actively recruit people from other parts of Europe, and of course, Germany. Well, there is no Germany until 1871. The various German-speaking states in Central Europe are a prime source of emigration outward at this time into the Russian Empire. And so on 20th of February 1804, Alexander I issues another manifesto inviting Christian foreigners, this time to settle in the Black Sea region that had been taken from the Crimean Khanate. Now, this occurs at the same time that the Russian government under Alexander I is visibly advancing westward into, or fighting westward against the French during the Napoleonic Wars, following after Napoleon seizes power following the French Revolution in 1789. France was very aggressive, but the wars, particularly after they're over in 1815, and Alexander I is leading the Russian army into Paris, account for a large outflow of German immigrants into the Black Sea region for the push factor, for the same reason that many went to the Volga following the manifesto by his grandmother. That is, the push factors of devastation of war and the other things that accompany war that are unwanted. Now, the manifesto to settle in the Black Sea region is stricter than that in the Volga, in that there is kind of a vetting process. The people settling have to have certain skills, either agricultural skills or handicraft skills, but not just anybody can settle. So they have to have a proven set of skills to come to take advantage of the second manifesto and settle. But like the first manifesto, there's still freedom from conscription in the military, which is very important. This right had also been given to the Mennonites by, as I said earlier, Paul I. So we basically have three different German groups here, all of them promised, in addition to the land that they are settling, a freedom from conscription, that they do not have to serve in the Russian army. And this will be important when we come up later as to why many of them end up emigrating out of the Russian Empire, particularly the mobilization of reservists for the Russo-Japanese War. They migrate into the United States, Canada, Argentina. It also is a reason why many go eastward within the Russian Empire. Those going to Siberia and Kazakhstan, they're given particularly Mennonites, given a continued exemption from military service in the Tsarist army. So that's something that unites all of them at this point. And of course, the devastation, it particularly the 30-Year War, which of course takes place before any of this, but still in long memory. It's basically a combination of the American Civil War and World War II fought in the middle of Germany, religious civil war between Catholics and Protestants, absolutely devastating in terms of horrible human loss and destruction. And then on top of this, we have the smaller but still rather devastating wars, the Seven-Year War, and now the Napoleonic Wars. Uh, you can see kind of the Germanic idea of order and promptness being a reaction against the horrors and chaos and just total disruption of these wars fought in the middle of German-speaking areas. That's something that you don't want to be visited upon yourself, your family, your neighbors ever. Uh, but it does push a lot of people to leave these various wars. And so just as the Seven-Year War pushed many of the people to go to the Volga to settle, the Napoleonic Wars push a lot of people to go settle in the Black Sea. In fact, between 1804 with the manifesto by Alexander I and the Crimean War, which was fought in Crimea, obviously, but this is part of the region being settled from the Crimean Khanate and the surrounding areas of Ukraine. There's almost 100,000 ethnic German immigrants into this region, the Black Sea region. Now, one thing is different that I should note between the two groups. The Volga region, the initial settlement is about a little over 22,000 people. And by the beginning of the Second World War, there's about equal numbers of people in both Black Sea region and Volga region. You can look at some of my published papers if you want to get exact numbers available on Academia EDU. But the land tenure systems under the Tsars are considerably different. In the Volga region, they end up adopting the communal agriculture of the Mir system. That is, the village itself owns the land and it redistributes it periodically to various families on the basis of their ability to farm it. So how many able-bodied workers they have. One of the things is that this repatriation of land strips may not be contiguous. So you may have one or two strips here and have to go over to another area, a couple more strips. And they could be separated by quite some area. But the amount of land you have can be changed periodically by a decision of the village, depending upon the number of able-bodied workers in the family. If you have more able-bodied workers, you can get more land. If you have less, you can get less land. And so this communal agriculture is adopted by the Volga Germans as far as how they redistribute it. But curiously enough, while the Russian Mir is often pointed out as a reason for inefficiency in agriculture in Russia, the Volga Germans are very successful agriculturally for a number of other reasons. But in Ukraine, where the Black Sea Germans are just amazingly successful agriculturally, and they end up owning a huge amount of land. By the time the Tsarist government collapses, the amount of land that is owned and farmed by ethnic Germans in Ukraine and Crimea is larger than the size of the former East Germany. And the land here is given to individual families, so it is not communally owned or repatriated. In fact, in almost all cases, there is a prohibition on dividing the land. So the land is inherited in its entirety by a single son, and it's almost always the youngest son. So we have an expansion, formation of many of the daughter colonies, of the Black Sea Germans petitioning the Tsarist government for more land, purchasing more land, trying to get more land to give to the older sons who are not going to inherit the parcel of land owned by the parents, and there is this prohibition on dividing the land and to cutting it up. So you have accumulation of land. But this means as time goes on and it becomes more difficult to get additional land for the other sons, there are more and more landless, very land poor Germans in Ukraine. And this is a big spur, along with the issue of military conscription, for emigration, both to the New World, Canada, the U.S., for those that are Roman Catholic, Argentina, but also eastward into Siberia and Kazakhstan, and even areas further afield in 1882. Some German settlements, the Mennonites actually in the Talas Valley in Kyrgyzstan are established. So that is the pressure there. The pressure on land, of course, is less so because you can repatriate the land communally in the Volga region. But it also has some other problems. There is a famine in the Volga in 1891 and 1892, and it does also spur both migration eastward within the Russian Empire itself, to the Asian areas, and outside of the Russian Empire to the Western Hemisphere. So these are pretty much what's established there during this time. And they're fairly stable up until the 1860s. And then after 1861, with the abolition of serfdom, there is an attempt to reform the Russian Empire to equalize the various status. And one of the things, in addition to abolishing the class of serfs, there is also the abolition of the special privileges, the substance of the class of German colonists. So they lose over a period of time from 1871 to 1874 many of their privileges, including communal self-government, including freedom from conscription after 1874, to give them the same basic legal status as the former serfs who have now been freed from the landlords. The landlords have been paid off by the crown, the Tsarist government, to free them from serfdom. So we'll go into this, but each one of these things seems to be getting longer. But we'll start around the 1870s next time, emigration out of the Russian Empire. This is where many Americans in the Midwest, many people in Western Canada, where their ancestors came from. My father's side of the family were ethnic Germans, Bohemian Germans, which I'll deal with next time, but came from Ukraine to Canada and then the U.S. So that is where we kind of get this multiply displaced diaspora, and it starts spreading out both westward in the Western Hemisphere, eastward into Asian areas of the Russian Empire. After the series of reforms, starting in the 1860s and going into the 1870s, which in many ways change the legal status and the way of life of the ethnic Germans in both Ukraine and the Volga region. But also there are, as I said, long-term economic trends going on, particularly the problem of shortage of land for ethnic Germans in the Black Sea region, which is supposed to be the center of the talk here. So I'm not sure when I'll get to the third one here. Hopefully this series keep going on, but eventually I'd like to at least get to World War I, the end of the Tsarist Empire, before we get to communism. But I'll leave it at here. And next time we'll continue there. So, до свидания.